fast, where truth moves faster than a Holstein calf. No waiting on some pretty page. We're charting new ground in the digital age. From genomic codes to row-wide facts, we cut through the noise, no holding back. Not your daddy's dairy news tonight. We're sparking debates with every insight. The ring's not where the real fight's at. It's in the data, in the channel chat. From pasture to processor to your morning cup, we're raising the stakes. Try and get ahead of herd. Yeah! Where the future's more than just a word. Ahead of herd. Come on! The Bullvine's calling, let your voice be heard.
Welcome back to the Bullvine Podcast, where we cut through dairy industry noise to get you the insights that actually matter for your operation.
And today, we're diving deep into a feature piece that's been generating some serious buzz. This one has layers and some surprises that are going to make farmers really rethink how they've been approaching those unexplained herd issues.
We're talking about a hidden electrical threat that, when it's properly identified and fixed, well, it resulted in a truly staggering verified gain of nearly 20 pounds of milk per cow per day.
That's right, 20 pounds.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately, because 20 pounds is the difference between surviving and thriving. This is a deep dive into stray voltage and, specifically why the standard electrical utility testing protocol might be missing the core problem entirely.
And potentially costing you years of frustration and, millions in lost production over time.
We are talking about stray voltage now because, frankly, it's one of the most frustrating and consistently misdiagnosed problems in modern dairy.
It really is. It's this invisible culprit that often gets blamed on management failure.
Exactly. Especially when margins are tight and producers are looking for any possible explanation for why performance is declining.
You have to think about the typical cycle. Production dips, maybe the water intake drops, cows get a little nervous in the parlor. So what does the farmer do?
They call the nutritionist.
They call the nutritionist, they check the TMR, they adjust the mineral packs, they call the vet about, chronic mastitis that won't clear up. They spend thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, trying to fix what they think are feed or health issues.
But the entire time, the farm's own infrastructure, or maybe even worse, the utilities, is the actual source of the stress.
Right. And this deep dive really forces us to consider that all those other explanations might just be a complete distraction from the real infrastructural issue that's hitting the entire herd at once.
And the stakes, they absolutely demand your attention. There are estimates, and we can track these back to foundational research, like the USDA Agriculture Handbook 696, that suggest up to 20% of dairy operations may be dealing with some level of stray voltage.
20%.
That's 1 in 5 of you listening right now who could be wrestling with this without even knowing it.
And when you're talking about making payroll or making a full financial recovery versus potentially having to shut the doors, recognizing these subtle symptoms early is the absolute difference maker.
And that number we keep coming back to, that 20 pounds per cow per day, it isn't just a theoretical number, is it?
No, not at all. It's the verified recovery reported by producers after they finally get a resolution. So if you were sitting on a 20-pound daily loss you didn't know you had, that is your entire profitability margin just disappearing into thin air.
Okay, but here is the critical controversy. This is the central technical flaw that keeps this problem hidden and keeps everyone, chasing ghosts for years. Utilities measure stray voltage using a standard resistance figure, right?
They do. They use the National Electrical Safety Code, or NESC, accepted standard. It's a 500-ohm resistance standard established way back in the 1990s.
So the utility comes out, they plug in their meter, they get a reading that falls below the accepted, 1-volt threshold?
Usually, yeah, that's the common benchmark. And they tell the farmer, it's not us, we're within compliance.
And that piece of paper, that official compliance report, it gives the farmer this false sense of security. Or worse, it pushes them to fire their nutritionist because the utility's own documentation says the problem isn't electrical.
That's the trap. Because the problem is that the data, the actual field research, suggests the utility's whole premise is flawed.
How so?
Well, research, including work referenced by Dr. Richard Norrell at the University of Idaho, shows that a dairy cow's body resistance averages significantly lower than 500 ohms. We're often talking between 200 and 400 ohms.
Okay, so wait. If the animal's body resistance is maybe half of what the utility tests for, that means the cow is actually experiencing, double the electrical current?
Potentially double or even more of the current that the utility standardized test is calling safe. It's a systemic oversight. It's based on these outdated protocols that were really designed for human safety, not for highly sensitive livestock.
So until farmers understand this technical difference, this disparity, and start demanding better testing, they're just going to keep bearing the cost of an infrastructure problem that isn't even theirs.
That's the bottom line.
So let's ground this in reality. Let's look at the mystery of the failing herd through the eyes of a real producer, Jill Nelson from Olmar Farms in Sleepy Eye, Minnesota.
And this is such a key example because this was not a struggling operation by any means. They were winning awards. They were an elite registered Holstein herd known for absolutely exemplary management.
And yet, over 8 years, the farm struggled constantly with these unexplained health and performance issues.
It's the ultimate example of this hidden crisis because it proves that just doing everything right, the cleanest facilities, the highest genetics, the perfect feed, it doesn't grant you immunity from this.
So what was the tipping point for them? What happened?
Well, Nelson's journey really began with the most dramatic event possible. What if her best cows died, just unexpectedly, after a completely normal 70-pound milking day?
Just dropped dead.
Pretty much. And the consultants she brought in, everyone from nutrition to milking system experts, they all confirmed her management was top-notch. The cow simply shouldn't have died.
That kind of sudden mortality in a high producer is the ultimate red flag, but I imagine the day-to-day symptoms are what really drag an operation down slowly.
They are. And we need to look systematically at these core behavioral shifts that signal an electrical issue, not a feed or health problem.
So where do you start? What's the first thing you should be looking for?
The first, and you could argue the most important signal, is all about water. You see cows hesitating at the water troughs. That's the classic dancing behavior.
Dancing, what does that look like?
They'll approach the trough, they'll put their nose near the water, hesitate, maybe pull back, and then repeat that a few times. Then instead of a normal, relaxed drink, you see this unusual, quick, lapping behavior.
So they're just sort of testing it.
Exactly. The cow is testing the water. She's sensing that low-level current before she commits to a deep drink. The electrical current in the water is causing these little microshocks. And over time, that just leads to total water avoidance.
And that avoidance behavior is absolutely critical because water intake is directly tied to milk production. No water, no milk. It's that simple.
And we've seen documentation of animals actively drinking from dirty puddles, from runoff, or any natural source they can find outside the barn while completely avoiding their standard, clean, constantly filled waterers.
That is a massive flashing light. That's a conscious decision by the animal that the trough is unsafe.
It's a direct signal of electrical interference. And beyond water, the symptoms then start showing up in the parlor. Previously calm, compliant animals, they suddenly develop this profound nervousness. And we're not talking about one new heifer being a little spooky. We're talking about established, mature cows that suddenly need leg restraints or start kicking just to be milked safely.
And why is that? Is the current in the parlor itself?
It often is. The electrical current can flow through the milking machine, through the metalwork and the concrete floor, creating this continuous, annoying electrical stimulus during the most critical part of her day.
So you've got water avoidance, parlor nervousness, and then you layer on the health issues that seem totally disconnected.
Totally. You get this increased mastitis incidence that suddenly becomes treatment resistant. You see high rates of reproductive failures and, like we said, unexpected mortality, particularly in your most sensitive, highest producing animals.
The cow is fighting a battle you can't even see, and it leads to this systemic breakdown.
So let's translate this. If I'm running a 600 cow operation and I see a 2-pound dip in my rolling herd average, some chronic lameness, and I'm pointing the finger at my feed consultant because his TMR numbers didn't match the actual intake.
You might be missing the point entirely.
Exactly. Hold on. So this means if I'm seeing half a dozen cows getting skittish in the parlor, or my water consumption reports just look wildly erratic from day to day, the culprit could be the ground rod for the fence charger, or it could be the shared utility neutral system miles away.
That is precisely the implication. And the frustrating observation that Jill Nelson made just makes perfect sense once you understand the root cause.
What did she say?
She said, and this just captures the sheer psychological toll of it, it looked like we were failing at everything simultaneously. Nutrition problems and health problems and reproduction problems and behavior problems all at once.
Wow.
Why would a highly managed elite herd suddenly fail at everything? Because the problem wasn't the management. It was one single electrical source triggering system-wide biological stress.
Which brings us right back to the core industry reality check. Why did 8 years pass at Olmar Farms with standard utility testing repeatedly showing acceptable voltage levels?
It masked the problem entirely. And the reason is purely technical. The testing standard is functionally faulty for this specific biological application.
It all comes down to what you call the 500-ohm flaw.
Right. So when utilities test for stray voltage, or I think they prefer to call it neutral to earth voltage, they follow the protocol from the National Electrical Safety Code, which again dates back to 1991.
And that protocol requires them to insert a 500-ohm resistor into their equipment. The idea is to simulate the body resistance of the animal or person coming into contact with the voltage.
But we need to emphasize why 500 ohms was chosen. It wasn't based on cows, was it?
Not at all. It was based primarily on human safety standards at the time. It was designed to offer a protective buffer for people who might come in contact with electrical infrastructure. It was never calibrated or established based on the physiology of dairy cattle.
Which are just vastly more sensitive. They have different skin, different hoof and body conductivity. It's a completely different biological system.
And the flaw is proven by the field data we talked about earlier. The research confirms that actual dairy cattle body resistance can range dramatically from as low as 100 ohms up to maybe 400 ohms. It's significantly lower than the standard test assumes.
The cow is just a better conductor of electricity than the test allows for.
A much better conductor. And let's break down the implication using Ohm's law, because this is where the money is lost. Current, which is what the cow actually feels, equals voltage, which is the electrical pressure they measure, divided by resistance, which is the cow's body.
The utility measures voltage, but the cow reacts to current.
Precisely. So
Yep.
Let's take a standard accepted measurement. Let's say the utility measures 1.0 volts, which is often the guideline used for safe stray voltage.
Okay, 1 volt.
With that 1 volt, they assume 500 ohms of resistance. So their calculation is 1.0 volt divided by 500 ohms equals 2 milliamperes of current flow. They see that number and say, acceptable.
Okay, that's the utilities calculation. Now let's run the numbers for the actual animal. If that cow's resistance is only 200 ohms, which is well within the typical range, and the utility still measures that same 1.0 volt.
The cow's reality is very different. It's 1.0 volt divided by 200 ohms, which equals 5 milliamperes of current flow.
So that's 2.5 times the current that the utility reported and called safe.
Exactly.
Wait, and let's push that even further. The research suggests that behavioral responses in cattle, that dancing and hesitation, can begin at around 2 milliamperes.
It can. So that acceptable limit of 1.0 volt at 500 ohms is already the starting point for stressing the animal out.
So what happens if the voltage is slightly higher, say 1.5 volts, which can happen with temporary load spikes from equipment?
Okay, so the utilities calculation would be 1.5 volts divided by 500 ohms, which is 3 milliamps. They'd still consider that a low risk by their standard.
But the cow's reality at 200 ohms,
The cow's reality is 1.5 volts divided by 200 ohms, which is 7.5 milliamps. Now you are at more than 3 times the threshold where behavioral changes begin.
and that's why the animals are dancing. They're experiencing this constant, low-level electrical pain that just accumulates into chronic stress.
This completely invalidates the standard for sensitive animals. And it's why the independent specialists that Nelson hired in 2016 used specialized equipment.
What kind of equipment?
Equipment capable of millisecond resolution recording, and crucially, they tested with more representative, lower resistance values. They were also looking for transient spikes.
That's a key nuance for our savvy audience. We're not just talking about a continuous, steady voltage.
No, we're talking about transient voltage spikes. These are quick, momentary bursts of electricity that happen when heavy equipment, like your large vacuum pumps or bulk tank compressors, cycle on and off.
And those spikes, even if they only last for milliseconds, can deliver a really painful jolt.
A jolt that teaches the cow to fear the parlor or the waterer. It becomes a conditioned response.
And what's the mechanism behind those spikes? Where do they come from?
It's often tied to the multi-grounded neutral system we use in North America. The electrical code requires the neutral wire, that's the return path for electricity, to be grounded multiple times along the distribution line and at the farm service entrance.
And that's a safety feature, right?
It is, but it's also the pathway that allows utility source problems to force current through the earth and into your farm's bonded facilities. And that's where the cow provides the easiest path to ground through her hooves, her tongue in the water, or her udder during milking.
Yeah, so here's the contrarian take, the Bullvine position on this. The utilities, they're protecting their testing standard, not your cows.
At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. You cannot afford to accept utility results that fall within that 500 ohm standard if your herd is showing symptoms. That standard is functionally meaningless for herd health when the symptoms are present.
Okay, let's follow the money then. Because for farmers, the bottom line is paramount. We mentioned the scale of the investment, which can be daunting. But the Omar Farms economic turnaround is so profound that it provides an ironclad ROI case for this expensive, often feared solution.
We have to face the price tag up front. The solution Jill Nelson implemented, because the source was traced back to the utilities infrastructure, was an isolated transformer installation.
Which means what exactly?
Complete physical separation of the farm's electrical system from the utility infrastructure. And in her case, it also involved a conversion to three-phase power.
And the cost?
The cost, including all the complex trenching and installation over 100 yards from the buildings, it approached $100,000.
Wait, that's a massive commitment. $100,000 is bankruptcy territory for many smaller or highly leveraged operators. Are you saying farmers should just drop six figures on this without absolute 100% proof?
No, absolutely not. That's the correct skeptical pushback.
What if they get it wrong and the problem was just a bad motor on their own farm?
You should not invest $100,000 without absolute independent verification, which is why that previous step, the independent testing, is completely non-negotiable. However, if that independent test proves the utility is the source, then the investment is absolutely justified by the return.
Okay, so let's quantify that return. Production increased by nearly 20 pounds per cow per day.
The specific verification reported an 18-pound increase during the subsequent summer months, which is doubly impressive.
Why is that?
Because it happened during a period of heat stress when production normally dips. So to see a gain that large during the summer is just incredible.
Let's run the quick math for the farmer who's listening right now. A 150 cow herd experiencing a 20-pound gain.
Okay, so that's 3,000 extra pounds of milk per day. At let's say a modest milk price of $20 per hundredweight, that's $600 per day in gross revenue increase.
$600 a day.
So over about 167 days, that's about 5.5 months. That investment of $100,000 is paid back entirely.
A 6-month payback period. That dramatically short payback is crucial because it turns what seems like a terrifying expense into a critical infrastructure investment.
We rarely see farm improvements deliver this kind of immediate, verified economic benefit, especially when you compare it to the marginal gains you might get from, say, changing a feed additive.
But we absolutely must differentiate the costs here. Not every stray voltage problem requires that $100,000 fix.
No, you need a systematic approach. On-farm sources are usually much more manageable. Things like damaged motor insulation, corroded connections, inadequate grounding systems, or poorly implemented equipotential planes.
And remind us what equipotential planes are.
They're the steel mesh or grid that's put into the concrete in modern parlors and holding areas. The whole point is to keep all the conductive surfaces at the exact same electrical potential, so there's no voltage difference for the cow to feel.
And fixing those on-farm issues is a much smaller financial burden.
Much smaller. Typically, you're looking at a range from maybe $800 to $10,000. You always start there. Validate and fix every internal source first, because that helps isolate the problem.
And it's the utility source issues, the undersized conductors, the deteriorated neutral connections on the primary lines, severe phase imbalances that require that massive investment in physical separation.
Right, the isolated transformer. That's what pushes the cost into that $50,000 to $100,000 plus range, depending on the distance and the terrain.
And one final point on the money. The insurance check. This is an urgent to-do for every single listener.
It is. Most standard SARM policies do not specifically address stray voltage losses or chronic production depression. You need specialized riders, and producers have to verify that coverage now rather than waiting until they need to file a multi-million-dollar claim covering 8 years of lost production and genetic damage.
So let's revisit the Omar Farms case study one last time, just to shut down any argument that this was somehow a management issue.
They maintained a rolling herd average of 26,192 pounds. They received the Holstein Association USA's Elite Breeder Award. They used modern facilities, equipotential planes, tunnel ventilation, sand-bedded freestalls. They were elite managers, full stop.
Exactly. If perfect management can't fix it, then it has to be a combination of biology and infrastructure. So let's connect those dots now. How does that tiny electrical current, which barely registers on a standard utility meter, cause such devastating, varied symptoms?
Here we rely pretty heavily on research from institutions like the University of Wisconsin-Madison, particularly from Professor Doug Reinman. The mechanism is what's called the cortisol cascade.
The stress hormone.
The primary stress hormone, yes. That repeated low-level electrical exposure acts as a chronic, inescapable stressor. It's not a single crisis event. It's a constant, annoying stimulus. It's like getting a continuous stream of spam calls that you can never, ever silence.
And that relentless stimulus constantly triggers the release of cortisol.
It does. And chronic cortisol is catastrophic to the entire system. Cortisol is designed for a fight-or-flight response, not for day-to-day existence.
So what does it do to the cow?
It causes system-wide damage, starting with a profound suppression of the immune function. We're talking about reduced T-cell production, those are the body's primary immune defense cells, and weakened antibody responses.
Which explains the systemic failures. It's why you see treatment-resistant mastitis. The cow's immune system simply isn't mounting a proper defense against the bacteria.
It's why you see high rates of reproductive failure, specifically issues like retained placentas and an increased incidence of metritis. The stress hormone is interfering with uterine function and overall hormone regulation.
And it links right back to the behavioral issues we talked about at the beginning. A cow that is chronically stressed, whose immune system is running on fumes, is going to be nervous, skittish, and easily startled.
The electric current is irritating her feet, her mouth, her udder, and the cortisol is preventing her from being able to cope with that stimulus.
That accumulation of stress also explains the sudden mortality in high producers, doesn't it?
It does. High-producing cows already operate at a higher metabolic stress level just by their nature. When you layer relentless electrical current on top of that, their ability to cope with common pathogens or even just the daily demands of high production is severely compromised.
They just crash,
Yeah.
often unexpectedly, which is exactly what happened at Olmar Farms.
And here's the long-term devastating implication that often goes unaddressed. We're talking about transgenerational effects.
So this affects their calves.
It does. Research shows that calves born from electrically stressed dams can exhibit reduced immune competence, impaired vaccine responses. And Jill Nelson herself reported observing congenital disabilities and even cardiac abnormalities during those struggle years.
So if the mother is chronically stressed, that affects the development of the fetus, hitting your replacement program directly for years to come, long after the electricity itself is fixed.
The damage echoes through generations of your herd.
So we need to spend a little more time on the electrical mechanism because it informs why these regional infrastructure issues vary so much. We established the core issue, the North American multi-grounded neutral system.
Right, and when the utility's neutral wire can't effectively carry the return current, usually because it's old or corroded or just not big enough, it forces that current to seek the path of least resistance.
Which is through the earth.
Through the earth. And when it hits the earth, it looks for the closest ground connection, which is often your farm's bonded electrical system, your water lines, the parlor frame, the metal stalls. This is what creates that voltage difference between the ground a cow stands on and the metal surface she touches. That is stray voltage.
And this is why infrastructure age is such a huge factor. It creates these severe regional variations.
Absolutely. You look at older agricultural regions like Wisconsin, Minnesota, Vermont, upstate New York, they report far more utility source issues.
And why is that?
Because that infrastructure often dates back 40 or 50 years. The copper conductor sizes are simply insufficient to handle the massive load of a modern dairy operation with huge vacuum pumps, tunnel ventilation fans, and massive milk cooling systems.
The copper neutral wires are degrading, they're corroding at the connection points, and they just haven't been upgraded to handle the modern load. So the path of least resistance becomes the earth, and the closest herd pays the price for it.
But newer agricultural regions aren't immune, are they? They just face different kinds of issues.
Right. You look at places like Texas and Idaho. The operations might be newer, but they often share distribution lines with large center pivot irrigation systems.
And when those massive pumps kick on at peak usage times, often in the evening during peak milking, they cause instantaneous voltage fluctuations and phase imbalances that impact the nearby dairy facilities.
Leading to those transient spikes that jolt the cows.
Exactly. And then you have the geography of the southeast Georgia of Florida. They add another layer. They have to contend with these dramatic seasonal variations in ground moisture.
So wetter ground is a better conductor.
A much better conductor. So high ground moisture in the spring and summer makes the soil conduct better, and it exacerbates the stray current flow. Then low ground moisture in the dry season can reduce the conductivity, sometimes masking the problem temporarily.
And finally, you have consolidation areas like California's Central Valley.
Right, you have these massive, highly centralized dairy operations with huge electrical demands for cooling and processing. If the utility infrastructure hasn't kept pace with that large-scale consolidation and expansion, you get localized capacity failures that force current into the ground at just unprecedented levels.
The legal landscape, however, is starting to catch up with the science. That Iowa Supreme Court decision from June of 2024, the one upholding VAD's dairies verdict against Northern Natural Gas, that's highly encouraging.
That decision is absolutely critical. It's a landmark because it establishes a precedent for infrastructure liability that goes beyond just the standard electric utility.
So it could be a pipeline company or an industrial park next door?
Exactly. The court recognized that third parties can be responsible for forcing current through the ground and damaging a dairy herd. And most importantly, the ruling recognized loss of livestock value and reduced milk production as a quantifiable liability, not just simple property damage.
That shifts the legal ground entirely in favor of the producer.
It's a whole new ballgame.
So let's consolidate the skeptical approach we've maintained throughout this dive. The most critical contrarian take has to be, do not rely solely on utility testing.
You can't. Accepting an acceptable result does not ensure the safety of your sensitive animals because the testing standards are fundamentally flawed for your livestock.
And this is where documentation becomes your single greatest asset. Documentation determines the outcome, whether you're just troubleshooting or you're in litigation.
Look at the Paul Halderson operation in Wisconsin. They prevailed in litigation against Xcel Energy, and the reason they won was because they had decades of meticulously detailed documentation, production dips, health records, vet reports, all of it refuting the utility's repeated claims about so-called management deficiencies.
And that documentation has to be specific. We're talking about required documentation that is easily achievable today. You can use your smartphone to video the behavioral changes.
You have to detail the hesitation, the lap drinking, the parlor nervousness. Recording the timing of those changes relative to milking or other electrical cycles is absolutely crucial. You need detailed production records, tracking mastitis incidents and treatment responsiveness, and of course, documented mortality patterns.
And that leads back to the skeptical challenge we raised earlier. You have to advocate for independent testing before you engage the utilities formally.
Never go into that discussion armed only with your symptoms. Specialists who are familiar with agricultural electrical systems, they charge what, $3,000 to $5,000 for a comprehensive assessment?
And that independent testing is worth every single penny because it provides the leverage you need. The independent specialist uses the right equipment.
They use millisecond resolution recording with high-end Fluke or Dranitz meters. And critically, they test with representative low resistance values, 200 ohms, 100 ohms, to simulate the actual current the cow feels. They're measuring reality, not the outdated 1991 standard.
That $3,000 to $5,000 investment pays for itself very quickly if it shortens the duration of the problem by even just a few months.
Think back to Omar Farms. After they fixed the issue, their rolling herd average now exceeds 30,318 pounds. That's based on recent data. They proved that recovery is possible even after years of genetic damage and production loss.
And that recovery just underscores the importance of early recognition of the testing limitations and getting the right expert on your side immediately.
We have to internalize this biological reality. What works for the average 500 ohm resistor may not protect your most sensitive, high-producing cows, which are often the first ones to crash or show the symptoms.
And until regulatory testing protocols reflect the biological variation and sensitivity of dairy cattle, the responsibility for verification rests squarely with the producer.
You have to be your own advocate.
All right. Farmer just finished morning milking. They're driving to the feed store. What are the 3 crucial, actionable things they need to take away from this discussion and apply to their operation immediately?
Immediate action. This week, look for specific behavioral signals and document them. This is the cheapest and most immediate step you can take. Go observe your cows at the water trough and in the parlor with a critical eye.
Not just a glance, a real observation.
A real observation. Is there hesitation, dancing, unusual lapping? Video documentation of these specific symptoms using a smartphone is your first step. You need visual, time-stamped evidence. Also, rigorously track any sudden onset of parlor nervousness in previously calm cows, especially during the prep phase or during milking.
That video documentation becomes your key piece of leverage later. Okay, what's the medium-term strategy for the next 3 to 6 months?
Validate and systematically eliminate on-farm sources. Do not assume the utility is the problem yet. Those fixes are just too expensive to guess at.
So you start at home.
You start at home. Budget for and engage an independent electrical specialist. Plan for $3,000 to $5,000. Make sure they understand agricultural applications and, critically, that they use low-resistance testing protocols 200 ohms or lower. Their first job should be systematically eliminating all on-farm issues. First, bad motors, corroded connections, poor grounding, or failed equipotential planes.
Which are typically under $10,000 to repair.
Usually, yes. And this process isolates the problem and provides you with the proof you need if the source is external.
Okay, and finally, long-term positioning. For the next 1 to 2 years, this is preparing for the worst-case scenario where the utility is the verified source.
Right. First, understand your state's specific action thresholds, but realize that those standards are probably flawed. If your independent testing confirms the utility infrastructure is the problem, you have to understand that the necessary resolution, that isolated transformer installation, can cost up to $100,000.
But you also need to know that the documented payback period can be as short as 6 months if you can verify that 20 pounds per cow per day production increase.
Exactly. You need to be ready to make that calculated economic argument to yourself, to your lender, and to the utility, armed with your independent proof.
This has been another deep dive from the Bullvine Podcast. Sometimes what appears to be a chronic management failure, that unexplained dip in water intake or the rise in treatment-resistant mastitis, stems from infrastructure issues that standard testing protocols were simply not designed to detect.
If this kind of analysis helps your operation, head to www.thebullvine.com for more articles that tell you what's really happening in dairy. You can also review Jill Nelson's resources at strayvoltagefacts.com.
And seriously, subscribe wherever you get your content. We're releasing deep dives twice weekly now, and trust me, you do not want to miss what we've got coming next week about the complex and often overlooked interactions between modern facility design like tunnel ventilation and manure management and that aging electrical infrastructure. Until next time, stay efficient and keep questioning the standard operating procedures.